Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Aldo Sterone channel, the factory of revolutionaries. Standard & Poor's know Fitch downgraded France's rating from AA to single A+. The plus is the consolation prize. So where do we stand? If you want under A, you have triple B. I think Italy is in there. And triple B is the last step, if you will, before the Suez. It means that once you go below triple B, you're in what's called the zone. You're no longer in the investment zone, you're in what's called the speculation zone. So now we're in the game, aren't we? You can do what you want, but it's a jungle. In the immediate future, what might happen for France is that some large investment funds, foreign pension funds, or others, what they're going to do is they'll probably start selling French paper, French debt. They won't want it, not that they have anything against France, but simply, they have criteria that make them enter, criteria that force them to exit. And when those criteria are met, well, that's it. It's automatic. The rest? So the markets are now punishing Macron's inability and the people around him to manage the country. When you look at the numbers, all the figures for the French economy are extremely worrying. We won't go into detail, but we'll discuss other topics in detail tonight. Coming to make this video, I read about 30 articles, which is completely unusual for me. Usually I don't read them, I don't watch others, etc. Why? Before coming to make a video. Why? Because I don't want to be influenced. The flesh is weak. I don't want, against my will, to be influenced by someone else's content, and that this will prevent me from coming to give you a unique, original, fresh perspective, which might sometimes accidentally align with what's already been said, but could also be completely different. That shocked me. The 30 articles I read, why? Because they all repeat the same thing. Not a single one goes into the depth of the subject that really explains what is happening. So my friends, I'll tell you something very simple. I don't want to, or maybe it's not even a question of wanting. Things are what they are. Maybe one day I'll bow out. Maybe one day I won't be here anymore. Maybe I'll retire, right? So I want that when I'm not here every day anymore, I want to leave behind revolutionaries, people who have the tools to keep moving forward. So that's why today we're going to go beyond the big headlines. I thank you for being here, really, because I'm going to tell you something. Most people aren't interested in what's beyond the headline. Look, the big headline, that's where it stops. And I know you're not like that. Proof is you're here. So I'd like to thank each of you for being here. That's all, simply. So let's stop with the formalities, let's stop with the pleasantries. And we're going to talk a little bit about debt, about confiscation through debt, and what that means today. Because the story with Fitch, it's not just, well, that's it, France. Macron behaved badly, we're going to punish him, we give a bad rating. It's worse than that. If you want, it's the markets that give money. Easy money, easy. And then, after a while, they start to tighten the noose around the neck of the victim who is over-indebted. Once the over-indebtedness sets in and the victim really starts to have problems. Well, what do? They make the jury's technical situation worse. They make things worse by downgrading the rating. Automatically lowering the rating will raise interest rates. Because those who are going to lend money to France will say, well, your rating is bad. I'm willing to lend you a little bit of money, but I want to have a guarantee. I want to cover my risks with you because after all, you are still a debtor. You are risky people, aren't you? So what I want, you are a risky borrower. So what I want is a risk premium. And at that point, what will happen? For the country that is over indebted, well, the debt burden will become higher and higher. We're moving toward a logic of confiscation. So let me tell you, a lot of people today associate the history of French debt with January 1973, the Giscard-Pompidou law. On this subject, which said in extremely twisted words, it simply said that the French state does not have the right to borrow at zero interest. It's not at zero interest. It says that it does not have the right to borrow from the Bank of France. Simply put, the Bank of France does not have the right to lend to the French state. This mechanism was later reinforced by Maastricht, Lisbon, etc. But roughly speaking, that's the point where we trace it back to. In reality, that's not true. In reality, I'm going to tell you several things today about this topic. And a very important point already about 1973, the law, the infamous law of 1973. In reality, it's not that it forbade the Bank of France from holding French debt. That's not true. Often it's presented that way, but it's not true once again. Here's what actually happens. In reality, the law prohibited the Bank of France from lending directly to the public treasury, but nothing prevented it from lending indirectly. What does that mean, should I tell you? It means that in practice it works like this. The state issues bonds, so it issues a debt request, right? Private banks buy them. The Bank of France is not allowed to buy them. Private banks buy them. They demand interest in return. They say, okay, I'll lend you the money, but I want this much. So a market is created. Banks buy French debt, sometimes just minutes apart. The Bank of France comes onto the secondary market and buys from the private banks, buys the French government's debt from them. That means that in reality, what we did with the 1973 law was force the state to have a mandatory intermediary. We told the state, okay, you can still borrow from the Bank of France. So in reality, the 1973 law doesn't forbid the Bank of France from holding French debt. It can, in fact, it can, and it still holds a lot of it to this day. But actually what it says is that it doesn't have the right to acquire it directly. It must acquire it through intermediaries and pay their commissions, which often leads to a run. The banks sell to the state by, sometimes there are even tricks of illusion. Isn't that so? There are phone calls where they say, go ahead, buy it, I'll buy it back from you right away and give you a bonus. So what we've done is we've created rentiers, intermediaries who are just there to leech off the system. Isn't it just to leech off the state and take money just to tell you what we've done? Now, one thing is, it's not a mechanism or a phenomenon that dates back to 1973. It's a mechanism that we find about race from a very long time ago. And today we're going to read a very interesting document. I'm going to read you a few passages. I've explained them to you, but I really recommend you read the whole book. Here I'm going to go to chapter 24 of the book Capital by Karl Marx. Here I am in the first volume, published in 1867. I repeat, 1867. You see, we're more than a century before the law of 1973, all right? So just to tell you that this isn't new, this story, and I'm going to tell you how debt imprisons people. It imprisons them, and it's not by accident. Once again, it imprisons them by design. It's a prison, isn't it? It's a structural prison. It's structurally designed to imprison people and dispossess them. So let me tell you. So I'm on page 847. I always like to give my sources. You see, the public credit system, that is state debts, whose origins we find as early as the Middle Ages in Genoa and Venice, took over all of Europe during the manufacturers period. All right. So in 1800, in the 1800 AS, he is writing that the period of the manufacturers, that means between the 16th and 18th centuries, right? We have a public credit system. We have a public debt system that is starting to spread. So the system. So I'll continue. The state's debt, that is the alienation of the state, whether it is despotic, constitutional, or republican. I can add royalist or whatever. It leaves its mark on the capitalist era. The only part of the so-called national wealth that is actually collectively owned by modern peoples is their public debt. So yes, indeed, it's still quite extraordinary. And you realize that you see so-called rich countries, the United Kingdom, a very rich country, France, yes, well, G7, extremely rich countries. Yes, but when we talk to the people and address them, the only thing they really hold is public debt. But where is the public wealth? Me, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. Okay, you put the public debt on your back because very often you look at the newspapers. They say it amounts to this much. The debt rose this year. This equals a certain amount per household, French person or British person. So we divide the debt by the number of people, all right? And they tell us, they talk to us, they address us as if we took that money and then we got caught. But where? The public wealth? So public debt is the property then of the people. And we'll see a little bit what consequences that will have. Hence the modern doctrine, which is quite logical, that the more we go into debt, the more a people goes into debt, the richer it becomes. We're rich in debt, we're negatively rich. Public credit becomes the creed of capital. And to the sin against the Holy Spirit, which knows no forgiveness, succeeds the default both in faith and in public debt. So there you have it. We have the sin that knows no forgiveness. That's the sin against the Holy Spirit. And then we're going to replace it, aren't we? Because we're taking religion out. We're secular now. We're taking religion out. And we're going to have the sin against public debt, or the lack of faith in public debt. What am I doing here tonight in front of you? So when are we going to do it? With a wave of a magic wand, it gives unproductive money a procreative talent that turns it into capital without having to expose himself to the troubles and risks of industrial investments or even usurious loans. That means the advantage it's always been that way. The advantage for lenders is that in a way they don't need to take risks, especially with the state. Even the lender is called a loan shark. Someone who lends to people, who lends to Mrs. X or Mr. Y, risks not being paid back. Whereas here, they're lending to the state, so they have zero risk. And so their unproductive money starts working. But then be careful. There's something worse than that. There's something worse than that. And look at this one. But this is where it brings us closer to 1973. Look. In reality, the state's creditors give nothing. And you'll see why the debt explodes and we have staggering numbers. In reality, the state's creditors do not give anything, because the amount lent is transformed into a public bond that is easily transferable, which continues to function in their hands exactly as if it were cash. This passage is essential. It is absolutely essential. Look, my friends, it is essential. There's a couple in trouble. I lend them 10,000 euros. I need a paper and an acknowledgement of debt for 10,000 euros. What are they going to do? This acknowledgement of debt, that's not money I can't. Let's say I want to buy a car for 10,000 euros. So I go to the seller, the car, okay, your car, I give you 10,000 euros. So listen, I don't have any cash right now. Look at this paper. The Meet You couple on the 3rd floor signed this, I owe you for me, 10,000 euros. Okay, you give me the car, then you go see them. He's going to laugh in my face. You can see that. Since the Meet You couple on the 3rd floor isn't necessarily reliable, maybe they are. Maybe they've paid back less, maybe not. My paper, it's a risky paper, it's junk. On the other hand, if I have a government bond, so I'm lending money to the government, in reality, I haven't given anything. Why? Let's review it again. I have 10,000 euros here, I lend them to the Meet You couple. Do I still have the 10,000 euros? No, the Meet You couple has them. They can do whatever they want with it, but do I still have the money? No. So what should I do? I have to wait for them to repay me, to get back my 10,000 euros and use them, but they might not pay me back. Okay, that's a regular loan. Now, about the state, it's different. If I lend 10,000 euros to the state, what do I get in return? Bonds. Government bonds are negotiable financial instruments, just like cash. I can pay someone with them, I can buy a house with them, I can pay for whatever I want with them. It's accepted as money. So basically, I can pay someone 10,000 euros in government bonds. Well, maybe if I come across someone who doesn't know what it is, that's another story. But if I come across someone who knows what it is, a French government bond, for example, I tell him, listen, your car, I'll transfer my bonds to you. I have 10,000 euros in bonds, I'll transfer them. Okay, great. So he's giving me the car. On one hand, I gave 10,000 euros to the French government. But in a way, it's as if I haven't given anything because I still have access to it. I just spend money on a car right now. Now, in front of you, you see what I mean. So it's very important. It means that in reality, I haven't given anything. It's a debt that's created out of nothing, and that's why it can grow. Debts today are so large that they surpass all the world's circulating money. Why? because these are debts that are created artificially. So yes, debts and numbers are artificial. On the other hand, the chains and slavery from expropriation are reality. Because just as much as they can do to you, they can block you with an artificial debt. But at the same time, they'll take your ports, they'll take your airports, they'll take entire streets, buildings, they'll take an entire country from you. They're taking real things from you. I'll continue because debt is money. And what he's saying is, I'm not going to forget the whole passage. He says it creates improvised wealth. So wait, I can't find the passage. But actually, he says that it will create a caste of rich and idle people, of wealthy and idle rentiers. So you look at the damage that's being done around the world by people who are rentiers, who have a lot of money, way too much money, and way too much time on their hands. These are people who don't work and just receive money like that. So since their birth, the banks dealing with and raising national securities, National Bank too, right, have only been companies of private speculators siding with governments and thus put themselves in a position, thanks to the privileges they obtained, to lend them money. Okay, so speculator banks that are going to back up governments that come between the nation, ultimately, and its government, that come and insert themselves in the middle. And then they want the public, when they spend money, to simply give them their share. It's a confiscation along the way, but the confiscation goes even further. You'll see then. So he talks for quite a while about the Bank of England, Holland, and so on. And he says at one point, at the very time when in England they stopped burning witches, they started hanging them. The counterfeiters, those making fake banknotes. At some point, it was even considered legal counterfeiting. So the banks that issue banknotes, which are actually issuing counterfeit money, money created out of nothing, they want to have the exclusive right to issue this counterfeit money because the counterfeiter gets rich. Except that if someone is going to issue counterfeit money, if an individual makes counterfeit money in an engraving workshop and produces fake money, well, what is he going to do? He's going to compete with them. So at that point, we will condemn. We stopped burning witches, but instead we sentence counterfeiters to death. So now we come to the third and last page that I printed. I won't go any further, but we'll keep hammering the point and see what comes of it. Since public debt relies on the state's revenues, which must cover annual interest payments, etc., the modern tax system has become the necessary complement to the system of national loans. All right. By the way, when you look at the statements issued by Fitch and others, and you look at the news articles, like the 30 articles I told you about that I read, there are many that talk about France's fiscal policy. Okay, fiscal. State debt and taxation are always linked. Why? Because quite simply, as I told you earlier, there are two corollaries. The state borrows in the name of the people. The state borrows as a name. That's why the people of so-called rich countries own nothing but debt. And actually, they're told, yes, you own debt amounting to this much per person. And in fact, you have to pay it through taxes. So the two go together. That's why they say one is the corollary of the other. Borrowing lets the government cover major expenses without taxpayers feeling immediate effects. But they require high taxes later on. At some point, it has to be paid back. On the other hand, the increase in taxes caused by the accumulation of debts taken on one after another forces the government, in the event of new extraordinary expenses, to keep taking out new loans. Modern taxation, which is centered on taxes on livelihoods, basic necessities, and rising costs, isn't it? But because taxation, when it's a type of taxation that affects workers, affects raw materials, affects transportation, affects energy, all of that, it becomes a form of taxation that increases the cost of living. So everyone, in order to survive, is forced to pay this kind of tax. So wait, let me go back one step. Modern taxation, which is centered on taxes on subsistence and basic necessities, inherently contains the seed of automatic progression, overtaxation. Mm, It's not an accident, but a principle. All right. So we have a principle that is to always increase taxes because the debt increases. So the debt increases. We have a general increase in costs. We have a decline, a downward shift of the middle class. And at the same time, we have privileged classes, idle classes, classes of people who live off income, not from work. Well, they are the ones who are getting richer and richer. And we see the gap that is widening, the large share that goes into the capitalization of wealth and the expropriation of the masses through public debt and the tax system that goes along with it has led a whole crowd of writers like Marchand and all right? In fact, the reality is that we're in a system of expropriation through debt. And what you've seen from France today is that the downgrade leads to a forced increase in interest rates. The markets will lend or demand more money from France, and France will demand more money from its citizens. Or it has two ways to do it. Either it will demand more money, or how do we do it? We use shrinkflation. Shrinkflation is when you go to the supermarket and you buy a product and it's lighter. The chocolate bar will be 80 grams instead of 100, and the block of butter, which is 250 grams, will go down to 200, and so on. So there are two ways to raise prices. Either raise them directly or raise them by giving you less for your money. So what the state will do in the current situation in France is either increase taxes, and if it can't raise taxes, what will it do? It will reduce what it gives in exchange for taxes, so it will destroy public services. It has no choice. Debt leads to higher taxes and worse public services. That means he's forced to, and here he just looked at what's happening. In the United Kingdom, which has always operated under a neo-Victorian system. Back in the Thatcher era, there was a pretty clear deal, which was that in the United Kingdom, we stick to a Victorian system. There is no concept of public service, but in return, there aren't many taxes. You get absolutely nothing, but you're on your own. Here's your money, go buy public services from the private sector. We still believe there's no public service, but taxes keep rising and we're hitting a limit. In some ways, we're even surpassing France. Do you see what I mean? So we're in a logic of expropriation and dispossession. So my friends, I just wanted to talk to you about all this, to tell you that history, what you need to remember from this video is that the story of the debt is not a story that started in 73. It doesn't date back to Fitch's rating. It's a more complex system that dates back centuries to the Middle Ages, isn't that right? And which has destroyed a lot of countries in its wake. It is repeatedly restored until it leads to the country's collapse. A reset is needed, often triggered by a war or major economic crisis, but usually it takes a war. And after that, we have a reset and we can start over from scratch. As people start producing, they feel richer. And then we start again with the same system and we expropriate them because that's how it works. We let them work, we let them keep their heads above water for a bit. We let them get a little richer, accumulate a little, and then we come and take everything from them. It's like the bandit who sees the gold prospectors passing by in the morning. Well, they have nothing. There's no point in attacking them. You have to let them get rich, let them pick up nuggets, come back with their bags full, and from there you attack them and take everything from them. That's why the capitalist system is cyclical, with repeated ups and downs, especially during highs. They let society accumulate reserves, they let society fill up accounts, they let it fill up with savings and all that. Then they come and sweep everything away, taking it all. It's like the bandit who waits for the gold prospectors on their way back. Thank you all for listening so far. Let me remind you of my book, Escrology. It's a book that explains how the forces of money are manipulating ecology. And the fears, the deep-seated fears, the fear of the end of the world, the fear of collapse, the fear of climate change, the fear of all that, they are manipulating them to ruin people even more. I'll tell you, the story, all of human history, written history, is just the struggle between us and them. It's always been like that. And these are struggles that sometimes are obvious, sometimes they're hidden. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. But that doesn't mean that when you don't see them, they're not there, right? It typically ends with either a revolutionary societal transformation or the destruction of both warring classes. That's it. He has no other choice. It's always been this way. Human history in one sentence. Thank you, my friends, for watching until now, and I'll see you in the next video. In struggle. That's it. He has no other choice. That's always been it. The history of humanity summed up in one sentence. Thank you, my friends, for watching until now, and I'll see you in the next video.